What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 72 of Convos on the Pedicab. I'm here with an extremely special guest considering the circumstances that we're in right now. We have the owner of Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, but most importantly, he's an 8-year veteran of the U.S. military. He's been in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have Austin Talley here, and I'm really happy that you're here to kind of tell us what we could have avoided, what was actually going down, just give an inside scoop about what we were doing in the Middle East and how this situation could have been avoided.
Well, it 18 years of continued service in the military, but yes, I had 8.5 in Afghanistan and a year in Iraq.
Sorry about that. I got the
No, it's all
okay.
good. There's a lot of numbers. I was there for a lot of benchmarks. In Afghanistan, watching a society vote freely for the first time. I even got to spend Christmas with the Karzai family, President Karzai and his wife.
Really?
What
was that like?
In 2006.
That's pretty crazy.
It was a unique experience. The individual who I was working with, Mr. Vogel, was invited. He was dear friends with Karzai and his wife, and we spent Christmas at the palace in Afghanistan. I was there for the grand opening of the embassy, reopening in 2005, that the American taxpayer paid $700 million to build.
And then here we are right now.
Yeah.
When did you decide to join the military? Because I'm assuming if you've been active for 18 years, it was probably sometime after 9/11, or that was a catalyst or something like that.
No, actually, I went to college for briefly. Was given a little bit of an ultimatum from a relative who was willing to pay for my academics, and I reluctantly didn't really understand what I was going into with the military academy, and I turned down an appointment by a very decorative Vietnam veteran who was multiple citations, Army Special Forces medic, and Jim Dempsey out of Laredo, Texas, and I decided to go my own path, and I joined the Navy and had my 19th birthday in basic training.
Okay.
In '98.
Oh wow. Okay. So you were already there when all this stuff happened.
Yes, I was actually stationed in Puerto Rico at the time when the Twin Towers got struck by terrorists and came down.
Yeah, and then there's a whole list of stuff that you could get into about how Bush and Cheney potentially knew that this was going to go down.
Yeah.
And there was a video of him reading to children while this happened, and he just kept reading to the kids. Like, did you see that video where he was like reading to kindergartners, and they told him about this, and he just was like, whatever, and he just kept reading to the kids like nothing happened, didn't even leave the room, and then like there was so much stuff. And you've heard of the Project for the New American Century, right?
No, I have not.
It's a neoconservative think tank in the 1990s with like Cheney, Bush, Jeb Bush, like all these neocon warmongers basically had this goal of spreading American democracy throughout the world, specifically the Middle East.
Yeah.
And they said that in order to get the American people on board with it, you need a cataclysmic attack of epic proportions to happen. And then like 6 years later, 9/11 occurred. So there was a lot of like...
Well, I worked at a very prestigious think tank. George Tenet was the chairman of it, former CIA director, as well as Colford Black, former director of counterterrorism.
Okay.
And Matt DeVos, who's one of the leading experts in cybersecurity and black hat, white hat activities.
Yeah.
So I can say when you're coming up with theories of how we should be prepared and how you get a nation or a global allies or adversaries to either comply with that theory or what would our response be. You have to come up with hypotheses, and hypotheses may conclude that, hey, for this to ever really be able to happen, a major event has to take place. Heck, we used to say that jokingly in Iraq and Afghanistan, that if we could get these State Department idiots to really understand the threat level of those diplomats or those assets for government agencies, is that we need to be ambushed on our way to whatever objective we're going, and that maybe they'd shut up for a little bit and stop acting like we're driving the streets of D.C. and actually start operating like we're in a war zone. And so if you write that down on paper, then it becomes a catalyst or a seed for somebody to come up with a lot of theories that were in that meeting. So I'm not very well read on what you mentioned.
I'm not that either, but I've read enough about it to bring that up to you and ask you, right, as somebody who served, and what your thoughts on something like that were, right? Like that.
Well, dealing with coming from infantry to human intelligence kind of aspect in uniform, you learn a lot of things about human nature. You learn that if there's a path, that no matter what religious aspect or what demographic of the world that they come from, there's always at least some characteristics that are always true to happen, and that's called human nature. And I've really listened to that, where it almost becomes a spidey sense, where anytime I'm dealing business or dealing with somebody in any industry, that if I think there's potentially a relationship that's going to go right or awry, as I listen to human nature. And so I've been right every time.
What was your experience like when you were there? Like from jump, or just from the onset, just I guess chronicle it to the best of your abilities. Like, what was your experience like actually being overseas? And also, I'll be real honest about this whole thing too, right? Like, when all this stuff started, I felt like us going in there was kind of just bullyism.
Yeah.
And then, I heard people say, especially like the Fox News pundits, right? It's like they were almost talking about the Fox News pundits back in the day were talking about going to Iraq and Afghanistan the same way, Rachel Maddow and Don Lemon are talking about COVID.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right? It's like you're trying to sensationalize an event to create a fear and anger-based reaction in order to justify doing something that enriches a group of your cronies.
Yes.
So with that being said, I never understood how like a bunch of troops being in Afghanistan or Iraq was keeping me any safer. So I guess I kind of want to understand that perspective from you, having gone through that.
Well, when you go through the history of kind of the birth of the Taliban, and you go way back, and there's actually a phenomenal Nat Geo series where I think they released like 20-something DVDs as well. The reason why I know that is I bought the DVDs back in I think like 2006, right. and it shows the birth of Islam. And the different fractions of it, and then it shows actually to the birth of radical Islam. And then you track back from Osama bin Laden, his father, a very wealthy developer, and how he made his wealth in the Middle East, and where Osama bin Laden was, Western educated, stuff like that.
You didn't go like Harvard or MIT or something like that?
I can't remember what. He
went to an Ivy. He went to an Ivy, though, I think. Or he went to a very
well,
good
it wasn't
school.
American, but it was definitely top tier Western
school.
society education, and or equivalent to, and the deal is Osama bin Laden, he got radicalized. You see what we did in Afghanistan, and when we were supporting the Afghans against fighting against Russia, occupied Russia. That we left them hanging. The Charlie Wilson, a Texan, wanted to increase budget and continue building infrastructure, and sadly, the people always in power seem to not understand, You can't just win hearts and minds while you're at war. You have to maintain that relationship after war. And the only time we've ever gotten that right in American history in being involved in conflict, and if you look at the calendar, we've been involved in a new conflict, every 15 to 17 years in American history. And the only time we've gotten that right is after World War II. We stayed in Germany to ensure that there wasn't a third rise of a German conflict, global conflict, and we stayed in Japan. And we rebuilt the infrastructure. We changed the culture that made it more conducive between Asia and Western culture. And we built a relationship. You would never think ever again that Japan would one day wake up and go bomb the islands of Hawaii.
No. Japan is its own self-sustaining nation.
But it took over 50 years to build that relationship, and nobody was willing to commit what it would take for us to do the same.
But the Japanese people were also willing to accept the United States being there. It didn't seem like, maybe I'm wrong, but it didn't seem like the Afghani people wanted us here from the beginning, right?
Well, Japan didn't want us in the beginning either, but we ended up
anything changed,
building
right?
that relationship. Yeah, that's the deal. It's because nobody would ever commit. McChrystal said it great. He said we weren't, at the time, it was 17 years. We weren't fighting a 17-year war. We were fighting 17 years of individual wars. And it's because we reinvented the wheel every single time.
Yeah.
And
well, it's also my theory, and it's that this war wasn't really necessarily fought for the benefit of the United States. It was fought more for the benefit of defense contractors and central banks and Boeing and Raytheon and the pharma companies that made a lot of money off the opioid crisis, because we were literally taking heroin from the poppy fields and giving it to Americans. We were getting our own soldiers addicted to drugs, and the whole mess. And I want to talk about that too, but like a whole mess happened that could have easily been avoided with us not even being there, And then didn't the Taliban want a ceasefire back in like 2002 or 3, and then we rejected it? There was like a whole bunch of shit that went down, right?
It's never a ceasefire. They were running offices out of Qatar, right down the street from 2 military air bases.
Okay.
The Taliban has that's the difference between Western culture and Eastern culture. Eastern culture will play the 100 and 1,000-year game. American culture, you'd be at best if you can get 5 years out of.
Well, yeah, because you've only been around for 200 years, right? Yeah.
But we can't. We don't have the mindset or fortitude to think, no matter what, this is the goal I want to achieve, and we need to get there as a society. And I think you're right. I think Fox News, CNN, all of them were polarizing any activities there. It was one of the most covered wars in American history, and so it was instantly diversive between people here. I mean, my uncle, who's a lot more liberal than my father. My father, 24-year federal agent.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's great. Okay.
My uncle asked when I went into the Defense Intelligence Agency. After college and decided to go back to the Middle East, I joked that I was Tough Hedeman coming out of retirement to go back on the rodeo circuit. Yeah. And my uncle really never shows the soft side of him, but he asked my father why. He said, why is he doing that? And that let me know that this very tough guy who worked on the railroad all his life since he was 19, became a railroad engineer, that he truly worried about me as his nephew. And so I never thought about all of those things, because when you're serving overseas, it's just black and white. There's people trying to kill you, and you're trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
And so when you're back here, everybody's in real world. They're worried about bills. They're worried about 9 to 5. They're worried about food on the table. They're worried about everyday life. That when you're over there, you don't care about any of that. None of that comes through in your mind. That homemade apple pie, American flag, John Wayne shit in your head for somebody in my generation, none of that means anything. The only thing it means anything is the person to your left and right serving next to you.
Do you feel like our government did a good job of actually protecting the soldiers that they just continuously deployed over there?
Well, if you look at the numbers, you think in theory, yes. We had some of the lowest casualty rates in a major conflict like this, a war, not a conflict. We had sadly highest injury rate, wounded in action. But that's because modern medicine is at its best. So we had just over 2,000, I think 2,800 people killed in action. Contractors are actually American civilian contractors working for the government over there. We had a little over 3,000.
So you had more contractors. That's wild.
Yeah. In both conflicts, actually.
That is wild.
If you look at the total numbers, a little over 5,000 died in Iraq and Afghanistan combined, soldiers in uniform, and then contractors, a little over 7,000.
That's insane. Did you feel as though the people wanted you there when you were like in Afghanistan? Did you feel? Because I saw this Ron Paul ad from 2012.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
No, I did not. Yeah. But
I'm going to show it to you. But Ron Paul
downtown.
had this ad, basically saying, imagine if a foreign company just set up shop here and they're protected from all federal rules and regulations, and they continue to grow and grow influence, and then once in a while they did an operation that killed a bunch of people and they face no immunity for it, and then if you spoke out against them, there are more punishments for you than for them, and a whole bunch of things came on. And he said, well, that's what we're doing in other countries.
Well, but as a soldier and government representative, I guess, all that goes through your head. It goes through your head constantly, where you start empathizing with the local populace. And I think that's why some of the men and women that did the job I did, we did it really well, because we could operate in that very fine line. Because we all looked at it from the perspective, what if I was back home at my house back before I started deploying in New Braunfels, Texas, and I saw MRATs going down the street every single day, and my little nieces and my nephew were playing out in the street, and I'd have to scurry them off the street all the time. And what if one of them accidentally got hit and killed? Then instantly you just created a new terrorist, and I would be out for blood
instantly. Right, and that's I feel like that happens more than it should happen.
Sadly, just like when I was going through Army OCS back in the day, they instruct you that a 15% casualty rate is acceptable when it comes to the soldiers you're leading to war. There's also an acceptable casualty rate for civilian, and that's sadly, you got to look at war is diplomacy at its absolute worst, society at its worst. And you have to find some bit of humanity within that during that period, and that's what I try to strive to do. I built some phenomenal relationships in both countries. Some I used to tell the story when I worked at the think tank. We do a mirror image program where we're teaching personnel going overseas or fighting homegrown terrorism. Because we had, just in Texas alone, we had over 400 Taliban funders or sympathizers and recruiters busted alone in just Texas in the first year after 9/11.
What?
And so people don't forget. People forget that, they're not conducting operations over here because they're doing all their fundraising and all their recruitment and all their logistics and all their training and in areas that makes it conducive to survive and the likelihood of stretching those programs out longer. So when they're doing fundraising here in Texas or doing recruitment, they do all their operations in Afghanistan and Lebanon and Africa. And
so the terrorists are doing that in Africa to recruit Americans?
We had first person die in Afghanistan, American, was Mike Spann, working for the CIA. Person who killed him was an American citizen.
What was his name?
I'll let your audience go and look that up. Because
I remember the John Walker story. I was wondering if it was that same person.
I just don't care to give him any credit of his operations.
I understand, man. Sorry if that was a sus.
Oh, no, you're good, brother. You're good. It's just, we're faced with that again. We traded 5 terrorists out of Guantanamo Bay. Obama did for Berdahl, who was a traitor to his own unit and to his own country. And Berdahl came back, and we gave those Taliban leaders that are currently sitting at the palace and on national news, global news right now, are those same people that Obama released out of Guantanamo. And it came around full circle to bite us in the ass.
You got to roll your eyes at that stuff.
Well, everybody in uniform and works for the government, you realize politicians are full of shit and they don't know what they're doing.
Or they don't care. Or they're just total snakes and they have no problem just sacrificing their own for whatever gain that they can get.
The voters' attention span isn't long enough where they actually have to answer for they have consequences for their action. The simplest response to actions like that is vote them out of office. I mean, we're dealing with that here in the city of Austin alone.
I mean, we have
vote them out of office.
Yeah, except for the fact that we don't have a smart enough electorate to understand what's really happening.
Well, that involves the electorate to go out and educate themselves on the issues and on the candidates.
We also have social media companies that deliberately suppress any attempt at providing that education to a broad segment of the populace. So it becomes really difficult to do.
Whether it be conservative or a liberal platform, they refuse to do their duty as reporters, and that is just to be investigators, find the facts, and present them to your audience.
Like, I do a better job of providing objective facts doing this podcast than 90% of the journalists in Austin working for mainstream news outlets.
I would 100% agree.
Minus maybe like Tony Plahetsky and like Ryan Attulo, and I can't think. And Casey Claiborne maybe.
Yes.
But that's it. There's nobody else who works for any major news publication that I could say does a better job of honestly covering what's happening. And I'm not even trying to do that. I'm literally just trying to talk to people.
Well,
it's crazy.
Free thought, being transparent is very scary to people. And allowing your audience to formulate their own ideas and their own hypotheses to come their own conclusions instead of staring them to a controlled topic is very scary for people.
It is very scary. I think the way in which we handled Iraq and Iran and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And Afghanistan, the way I saw how we were blatantly lied to about that, the way I saw people voluntarily supporting the Patriot Act.
Yeah.
That
was scary as heck.
Yeah. The way I saw all of that.
Giving up your freedom.
Yeah, for safety.
Yeah.
Seeing all of that unfold when I was a lot younger has definitely impacted how I view the COVID narrative.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, it really has implemented that.
President Eisenhower, who was General Eisenhower, he said, if you want security, go to prison.
Yeah. Or like a mental hospital or something shit like that, yeah.
We live in strange times. Afghanistan could have definitely been handled differently. But I can't.
What could we have done better, man? Because I'm also looking at how we train the soldiers. Like, did you see that video on Instagram of like the fact that the Afghan soldiers don't know how to do a jumping jack?
Well, so we've thrown everything you can think of at that endeavor. $88 billion alone in training Afghan forces.
Okay, but then they can't do a jumping jack, so where's that money really going?
Well, so when we first started training, we understood there was an education disparity. Highest level of education in that country most of the time is around 6th grade.
Okay.
So we had to do tons of psychological tests on local Afghans and realized the tests were messed up because they weren't being curtailed to that region of the world. So then we had to do that, fix those tests. And then out of the top percentile, those became the Afghan Special Forces. And
so it's like idiocracy. Like the guy who can put the circle in the circle becomes like the top.
Yeah, becomes the top guy. And definitely not the sharpest tool in the shed, but definitely became the top guy in his region.
Wow.
But the cool thing is those personnel, being around Americans and seeing innovation and seeing problem solving, constantly being embedded to them, being trained by some of the nation's best, then that's when you saw those people really heighten their skills. And the cool thing is Black Rifle Coffee is a perfect example. They hired tons of those Afghan special forces that started at age 16 and then worked in the special forces until they were in their late 20s or late 30s, and then they came here under the visa process, and now they're employed at Black Rifle Coffee in Bernie, Texas.
That is actually pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't. I don't know that it really answers the question. Like, how is it that we spent 20 years training these people? We spent billions of dollars of our own taxpayer money to train these people to be self-sustaining, and then within 2 days they just get overrun with no fight. Like, how does that work? Like, how?
I think anybody who's spent time training, whether it be the Afghan National Army or the police, I myself and thousands of other Americans did it, to include my father. He was training foreign nationals in Dubai to be police officers. So when you see things like that, all your hard work, I spent, at a time, it was a third of my life in the Middle East, be flushed down the toilet in a matter of a few days. You kind of throw your hands in there and think, did I lose 43 friends for nothing? Did I lose a relationship with my mom for nothing? Did I lose a relationship in marriage for nothing? Because there's always two sides of every conversation. You know, my ex and I didn't have the best relationship, but I can definitely say I contributed being gone for the majority of it. That probably contributed to it. And that's probably why her and I became friends afterwards. But, you know, people think the sacrifice is just merely the willingness to put your name on a dotted line, which could mean you come home in a box. The sacrifice is being gone and the world continue. That's the sacrifice. And so seeing that all happen, you think, well, what if I would have stayed another 10 years? Would they have been even better? What if I would have stayed like Germany and Japan and stayed, you know, American presidents be there for 50 years plus? Would they be even better? I think we're always going to wonder that. But I can definitely say without a doubt, abandoning them for a second time in history, and the Taliban now conquering the Taliban conquering two global powers, but Afghanistan as a whole conquering 4 empires. We'll never, ever be able to go there and have any form of success.
I definitely see that. I also feel like this will damage our foreign policy for a very long time throughout the entire globe, and it just opens the door up for a country like China to continue being the dominant power in the world. And when you look at China's human rights record, when you look at how they subvert information, when you look at how they lied about this virus, when you look at how they manipulate their currency, when you look at how they treat Bitcoin in favor of their own digital dollars that they have absolute control over.
How they bankrupt foreign nations by lending out so much money they choke them out. And
we also used to
call
do that.
the bill.
We also actually used to do that
yes,
too.
We used to.
If you ever,
Banana Republics.
Yeah, if you ever read Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yes. Yeah.
We've done the same thing because we're controlled by people and we're governed by people who have no interest in the United States as a whole succeeding. Like, that's common knowledge.
Yes.
We're governed by people who have no allegiance to this country. That's what the problem is.
Well, when you see policy, federal policy have to be created and implemented based on exactly that, because they call it the Cheney bill, is because Dick Cheney had so much self-interest in major defense contracting companies, including one out of Houston, Texas, where he was making billions and billions of dollars, that they had to break that up. That you couldn't win that much in contracts, and by law, a subsidiary had to win at least 20 or 10 or 20% of that contract, and they were allowed to charge 25% over. Well, what it just became is a shell game, is because this company would own 3 other companies that own this company, or eventually they'd buy you out. And you now just all are under the same contract.
Right, which also goes full circle to the fact that our presence in Afghanistan, it just doesn't, especially 20 years of this, it doesn't seem like winning the war was really even a priority. It seemed as though lining up the pockets of defense contractors was a lot more prudent than winning, because the longer we stayed in there, the more these people made money, and the more these people made money, the more they contributed to the coffers of people like Biden and Liz Cheney and these neocons and Kissinger, all these horrible politicians. Like,
we do it right here in Austin, Texas. You don't think anybody that's in the circle of Mayor Adler is the owner of these now 8 hotels, the city of 7 hotels that City Austin is either renting or owning, or now they luckily got shut down by Williamson County to buy that one in Round Rock. But, then you got, uncle and cousin, kinfolks, KBR, that's what we used to call KBR out of Houston. That was the company Dick Cheney.
Okay.
Kinfolk, brothers, and relatives. But when you're winning, you're giving contracts to trash collection, into paving, into street striping, I guarantee you, I know for a fact it's happening.
Well, I know that, but they're not like subsidizing Raytheon or Boeing. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying.
But they're subsidizing, a third party.
And if they had the ability or they could gain from it, they would be doing it.
Adler just bragged about it on Twitter that they did the equal pay disparity whatever program, and they spent $1 million on research
to study universal basic income.
Basically,
why can't you just use that $1 million to actually give universal basic income? Or maybe don't spend $7 million to Catholic charities, which they're literally busing migrants in from the southern border. You don't know if they have COVID. You don't know anything, right? And I don't know fully what's going on, because I haven't been there. But it doesn't seem from the pictures or from basically how our government's just been operating in Afghanistan that I trust these people to look out for our safety in any capacity. So you look at that, right, and you're giving money to an organization that's helping to bus migrants into Austin who probably have COVID, who are going to spread the virus, and you have to ask yourself, why are you doing that? Like, are you this inept? Are you this out of touch? Or do you have something extremely nefarious to gain? Like, are you going to buy another hotel for these people? Do you want to do more restrictions so that you can buy up more real estate downtown?
After you drive the price down with crime and homeless population.
Yeah, like, is that what you're trying to do? Are you trying to use this as a way to tax to continuously raise the taxes and rents of people who live here so that the city can finance these programs, which in turn give their developer friends more money, which ultimately contributes to another cycle of them.
I have no
giving
doubt.
large amounts of dollars to their campaigns. Like, this is
in November 2022, when the election comes around, every city council member, present city council member, probably one of them is probably going to be running for mayor, is going to take all the credit for Save Austin Now. They're going to be like, oh, look, I drove the crime rate down. Look, I cleaned up our streets. Oh, look, we gave adequate, meaningful solution to our homeless population. When all of that was driven by Save Austin Now, both Democrat and Republicans. So it's a scary thing when you think of things, and when you do broad strokes, you almost come out sounding like you're conspiracy theorists. But I always tell people, just like we had to do with terrorism, it's an ecosystem. You have to track things that are very concrete. And one of the easiest ways to prove things is track the money. Because in terrorist organizations, you have to track the recruitment, you have to track the ideology, you have to track the training, and you have to track the logistics, where they're getting all their weapons from and explosives, and you have to track who's paying for all of this?
Yeah.
And so if you do that here,
And you also got to track who within our government or our State Department or whoever it is that's authorizing these decisions,
yes,
what they're financially invested in, right? Like, you know, if you have people in the State Department that own large amounts of stock in Pfizer when you had the opioid crisis,
Yes.
you got to think maybe they don't want
Yeah.
this to end, because the longer this goes on, if there's a new terrorist attack, if anything new happens, well, hey, man, somebody has to keep guarding these poppy fields.
Yes.
We got to keep prescribing opiates to the soldiers.
Yeah.
You know, like that.
98% of the world's opium was from Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's just one thing to think about, right? So, you know, and then you have like Halliburton with Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, you know, we didn't get vengeance for 9/11, but we sure helped Halliburton's profit margins skyrocket.
Yeah, what was it, like 400%?
Something ridiculous.
From the beginning to end.
Something absolutely
You know?
ridiculous,
Yeah.
you know? So I think it's a waking up moment. I think a lot of people who are like both on the left extreme and the right extreme seem to understand that there are some glaring problems
Yeah.
with how we spend our money, and glaring problems with central banking. And my hope is that we stop fighting with each other over COVID and restrictions, and we actually talk to each other about what's happening, and we say,
Yes.
like, yo, how do we fix this, man? Like, because I know these democratic socialists don't like central banks either,
Yeah.
but if you're doing their bidding
Yeah.
inadvertently, well, somebody has to have that discussion and figure out, like, okay, well, what you're saying makes sense in terms of a lot of this inequality, and, you know, maybe we're sorry. I mean, I wasn't one of them, but a lot of people on the right, maybe some of these people on the right owe them an apology for how they communicated with them in the past before they understood what was really at stake. You know, but there's got to be a discussion to be had with both of these factions to realize that the agreement is like 90%. They probably agree on 90% more than they disagree on.
Well, the biggest thing that when you want to keep a populace at bay is you have to remove the ability to educate. And I think they've done that well. You know, you did that with slavery. They didn't want slaves reading and writing and understanding maps because they couldn't run for their freedom. Couldn't acquire their freedom through education.
And they also couldn't communicate with one another to be unified.
Germany did it well too. You know, Germany burned a lot of books. They didn't want free thought. They didn't want abstract thinking. They wanted only doctrine that was being shoved in their face to be the only thing studied.
And you know what else too? And we're using this wokeism stuff actually to facilitate that. And people think like, oh yeah, CRT, we got to address racism and inequality and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no shit. Like anybody who doesn't think that racism is a problem, right? Like you're ignorant, right? Like racism is. There's never going to be a problem. There's never going to be
that in American history.
Yeah,
it's called,
I know. It's called American
the civil
history.
rights.
Yeah, it's called literally learning history, right?
Yes.
But what I'm trying to say is that like, you know, racism is never not going to be a horrible thing, right?
Yes.
Like it is always horrible, and that's something that should be ingrained in people. But you know
Without
what the most racist thing that you could do to a society is not offering people the means to financially educate themselves.
Yeah.
It is the most racist thing that you can do,
We're
especially when
we're
like,
the most strongest economic country in the world. One of
the biggest income gaps.
And we can't provide a level of education for everybody.
No, and you know what else
Yeah.
too, man? If you want to like talk about this Black Lives Matter stuff, you know that black people only acquire on average 17% of the actual generational wealth that white people have over the course of their lifetime.
That's crazy.
So if a white if a white dude gets $100,000 in equity by the time they die, the
Yeah.
black person on average gets like 17,000 of that, right?
Wow.
Which is horrendous. And a big reason for something like that happening, and yeah, you have redlining, you have a lot of stuff that happened historically that put people at a huge disadvantage that you can't undo, right? Like that happened. But what you can start doing is understand how money gets printed, understand that every time you print money, you're devaluing the currency. The more you devalue the currency, the more pointless it is to save, and saving and hoarding pennies actually hurts you.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they don't understand that.
Yeah.
And they become poorer and poorer and poorer. Or they just do really stupid, risky things to try to get rich really quickly, which usually just makes them poorer and poorer and poorer, and increases crime and does all types of really horrible stuff.
Texas Lotto, you know, it's a poor man's game.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say though is that, you know, I mean both you and I understand that the only way to like actually make your money work for you is you have to buy assets. When you have a fiat money system where you just print money with no gold standard and no hard money, that we don't have a hard money standard. The only thing that you can do to fight inflation, and the only thing you can do to actually keep your purchasing power intact and stay a member of the middle class, right, or advance to becoming middle class or get wealthy, is you have to invest in assets. And a lot of people don't know what assets to invest. A lot of people don't understand our monetary system. A lot of people don't understand how money is even printed or procured. So if we were to spend our time and resources financially, like educating black populations in terms of how to like make intelligent stock market investments, or teach them about Bitcoin, or go into black businesses and tell them how they can accept Bitcoin as payments and do stuff like that, you would address a lot of these problems that these people that progressives and BLM groups complain about would wind up eradicating themselves over a generation.
We still have a major populace of 60%, slightly greater, that doesn't go beyond high school. So why aren't we teaching these skill sets at high school? They used to teach you how to wash, clean your clothes, cook, and do simple banking. Fix your car.
Because a financially educated populace would be counterintuitive to what these people want. A financially educated populace wouldn't let governments, use the money printer the way they've been using it. A financially educated populace would understand that when you offer these massive stimulus and massive unemployment, it actually hurts poor people and working people over time if they just keep the money and don't invest it. It didn't hurt me too much. I bought Bitcoin, right? But like not everyone was able to do that or knew that. So it's like the more you print this money up, the more you actually widen the gap between the wealthy and the poor, because the ultra wealthy, the guys like Adler, they love this shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, hey, man, if more restrictions happen, Adler gets to buy more stocks.
Well, that's why I was fighting them
that's
tooth
what
and nail.
That's literally what happens, because they have the capital. They know what's going to happen. They're just going to accumulate more assets and choke regular people out of accumulating assets. The more you do that, the more you just create poverty.
Yes.
It's dangerous.
Totally agree.
Nobody know, but so few people know that instead we're having a culture war, which is fucking retarded.
I kept trying to tell people that more people die per year due to not being able to put food on their table. So that's poverty.
Yeah.
So more people die per year because of poverty than COVID, than anything, than heart disease. Poverty is the number one killer in this world, and that then it's a chicken and egg situation. That's the reason why I fought Adler every way I could, because I said, look, I just want you out of my way so I can provide a living for myself, and so that can all my staff. I've had the same staff for 19 months. That's not heard of in my industry. It's a 40% turnover rate.
And you were actually doing a lot of really cool stuff too. You were doing comedy shows and live music at a time when that wasn't even happening. You were the only spot in town that gave people an opportunity to even do that stuff.
Well,
back during the pandemic,
they were shutting down Cap City. Sadly, Cap City had to make an economic decision at the time. I was like, well, let's open up our lounge into a comedy club. I saw art studios being closed left and right because of people not being able to come in and participate.
And nobody's going to buy art in a pandemic.
Yes.
Nobody's doing that,
And so I still felt that artists needed an outlet. So I ended up saying, hey, why don't you just put it on my wall? I don't charge you a wall fee. I won't charge a commission. Just come here and showcase your ability. And so then it actually helped me, not under realizing that it did, is so when people were coming after me for being open, and I said, well, look, I've created a culture center for the arts, and I'm doing exactly what y'all taught me in elementary, junior high, and high school and college. I'm protecting the arts, and it made it really hard for people to argue with me.
Yeah. Well, how did they come after you? Because it didn't seem like you were really breaking any rules. You did what you were told. You just, didn't close, right?
They at first, it was funny. It wasn't funny, but they made a very national example of me. And
did they? What
happened? Took our TABC license, and we were the first 3 in the state of Texas to get our license revoked.
Oh, and in May, right? When all that shit. Okay.
And so we were the first in 50 years to get our license back in 72 hours. The investigation was flawed. The practices weren't being conducted well out in the field, and they weren't even adhering to their own statute. So we got our license back. We had a signed terms of agreement that we wouldn't sue them for defamation. And as soon as we all agreed that we would sweep this under the rug, even though it cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that we would be open, we all told our staff Thursday, hey, instead of being open today, go out and party and celebrate, have a great time. We all went out on the town like and you would have thought I was mayor. Every bar I walked into, I could not, and I don't drink, but I drank that night. I didn't pay for a single tab. It's because everybody was so excited for us and happy. We all partied on the town on Thursday. Then we're recovering at our house from our night of debauchery.
Yeah.
And that's when Governor Abbott stated at 9 in the morning that all bars and restaurants would be closed across the entire state. And so we lost again.
That's horrible. You could have almost just said we're gonna sue, and you probably would have made more money if you just sued.
It was sad, and so we felt like it was under bad intentions, and it was a lot of bad actors there. So I continued, and I was blessed by all media. I mean, it was all sides. It was conservative outlets and liberal outlets that were willing. I got interviewed 41 times in 2020.
That's wild, and it's helping you, I'm sure, a lot now because now you have name recognition.
I have people from Hawaii who came on March 10th to the bar because they saw us in the news and wanted to see the live music and experience that type of freedom.
How long are you guys closed? You guys were closed for what, like a month and a half or something?
It was 2 months, about 2 months. Yeah.
But you still had to pay bills. There was no relief. They want to relieve renters, but they weren't relieving you. They didn't give a shit about it.
Yeah, they did.
How much did you guys get in loans to cover that? Did you guys get any? Like, how much support did you guys get when all that stuff happened?
We didn't get any. We got some PPE late in the game, and that only covered the salary of our staff.
Okay.
So that helped them out, and we were grateful for that. But most people don't understand, like, that Texas government federal grant that they were giving out to bars and restaurants, that was based off of previous year's income. So
it was your first year opening or something, right?
It was truly our first year, but no, technically it was our second year. Thanksgiving was our second year anniversary, and industries that have been around for a lot longer than us. I mean, the recent article came out, and I don't blame them. But Kung Fu got, $3.6 million.
But is that even enough considering how many locations that they have?
No,
right?
it wasn't. And that's what people also don't take into account. And the deal is.
And was that for all their locations or just for the one in Austin?
No, it's all locations in total. They don't. That's the reason why they got that big of amount.
But that's not enough to cover.
No, it's not at all.
That's not. There's like a lot of Kung Fu locations. That's crazy.
If they don't own the land, you're looking at rental costs. That's the reason why so many bars, Dirty Dog Bar, have been around for 15 years. That grace the presence of Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. That closed because their landlord increased the rent by $40,000 per month. So bars, if they didn't own the land and they were tenants, then their location was 15 to some of them were $100,000 a month.
Yeah, and the city did nothing to actually help you guys or intervene, and they let these landlords do whatever they wanted while spewing out progressive platitudes that really mean nothing.
It gave all landlords an opportunity to get rid of tenants that they no longer desired.
It did, but wasn't there a rent freeze though? So wouldn't you be able to use that rent freeze because of all that stuff?
No.
Or was that only for residential?
That was
tenants?
only residential tenants. Yeah. Yeah, and
it's almost like it's a war on small business. It's almost like Mayor Adler was literally waging a war on small business.
When you have Amazon increase their profits by 300%, and I could still go shop at Home Depot and Lowe's and Walmart. When they were trying to run that curfew in Hays County. I was living in Hays County at the time, and had an idiot for a county judge there, Ruben Becerra. He tried to implement a curfew saying you couldn't go out past like 11 o'clock at night.
Was that like during New Year's or something like that?
No, that was way before.
Okay.
And I would intentionally, because I knew the gas station down the street was open late, I would intentionally go past the curfew to go buy, I don't care if it was a soda or a pack of gum, because I was like, nope. I did it every single night. Because
well, the cops weren't enforcing that shit.
Oh, yeah. The sheriff down there is phenomenal. He would publicly say, yeah, we're not enforcing that. And
I think that's kind of another reason why they're trying to defund police departments, because a lot of these, they're not going to say it, but I do think that a lot of these like bureaucratic officials who are super drunk on power from COVID are mad that the cops didn't want to just enforce whatever rules that they were making.
Hey, I might
does that make sense? Like, I really feel like
I totally agree with you. It's because the deal is we're dealing with it now with sound ordinance. The cops used to be in charge with sound ordinance, and we have an entertainment district that was created in 1856 here in the state of Texas.
Okay.
In Austin, city of Austin. I mean.
Yeah.
And in code enforcement can enforce citations because none of them were law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
So it was APD that did that as additional duties.
Okay.
And they did it they enforced it.
Yeah.
And now that's not the case. And so now a lot of live music, live entertainment venues are looking at actually the city statute, looking at what was existed and when did it was created, and go, wait, you guys can't change this. It says it right here. And so that's the reason why you see things at Rainy Street, like they don't care. They play music till 2 a.m. You see on Red River.
The cops still have the ability to enforce, but they're just not doing it anymore, right?
And they play music at Red River area and until midnight every single day. They don't care. But yet on West 6th Street, we have to shut down music Monday through Thursday at 10 and then we can play until midnight on Friday, Saturdays. Thursday, Friday, Saturday actually. And so it's just kind of a pick and choose, and the cops aren't participating in this anymore. They're like, nope, we're going to do what cops should be doing, which is solving crimes, ensuring that they're keeping the community safe, building relationships. It's serve and protect. And sadly, municipals use them as a form of revenue.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, I think if these BLM movements actually did something good, it kind of got the police to wake up a little bit in terms of what they should actually be doing.
I may not be saying something popular, and I know I'm not the first one to say it, but I almost think that you should make all law enforcement institutions sheriffs. And not have municipal police, that's what APD is, have nothing but sheriffs. Because the deal is they're all elected positions. If you don't like their actions, policing, you elect somebody else.
Yeah, but that could also be another problem considering who we have in Austin. You might elect like the most woke, leftist, BLM, pro-lockdown police chiefs that will start beating people senseless for not wearing masks outside. Like I could see that happening in Austin, and I could see Adler trying to promote that. So I actually
Aceveda didn't work out so well for him in Houston.
What happened with?
He started doing some really bad practices of serving warrants and led to some people's deaths. Actually served some warrants at wrong addresses as well. So there were some bad practices.
But he wasn't doing. He wasn't like a COVID Nazi though, was he?
No, he was. He was saying that if this is the statute, we're going to enforce it. But then Governor Abbott kept stepping in and saying no, you're not going to misuse these mandates for.
But the fact that he was willing to is not good.
Yeah,
but he's gone. He's in
Miami
now.
He's in Miami. He's fun in the sun.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah.
It's odd, man. Twitter is a really strange place.
Yes. It's destroyed our ability to have a civil discourse. You can't do that in 127 characters.
It's very hard. Well, yeah, and then you also have like, it's weird, man. There's like this little community of people on Twitter that are always arguing with each other about a whole bunch of crazy shit. But it's like I bet you if they met in person, they're probably like friends with each other. You know what I mean? It's almost like there's like this little community of like.
I mean, that's the way it used to be in high school and junior high.
Yeah.
The guy that you got in a fight with became your best friend. And I, to this day, I still have a few of those people that they're literally some of my best friends. And when I first met them, I got in a fight with them. But we live in different times. A civil discourse used to be, and you were taught this in school, it's called debating. I would come up with my argument, and I would back it with facts, and I either swayed you from your ideas to my side, or you swayed me from my ideas to your side. And if we didn't agree, we would at least walk away respecting each other's stances.
Yeah, or you might like say, "Oh yeah, that's not actually not a bad idea." Cool, I didn't know that. Yeah. We were talking about like the war and all that stuff. Do you think who do you blame for all this shit happening? Do you blame Biden? Because there's a lot of like Biden resign type stuff, right? And there's other people that are just blaming Trump because he was trying to pull the troops out. Like, what do you think like would have happened if, like, do you think this is Biden's fault? Do you think if Trump were in office, the situation would be different? Like, what do you think would have happened depending on who the commander in chief is?
I think it's been a failure from the
get-go.
That we didn't go in there understanding the culture. By the time we're trying to catch up to the understanding of the culture, it was a little too late. We didn't go in with a honesty that there's two different wars. There's a public relations war that we have to do with here in society, and then there's an actual war that's taking place. And I think there's a lot of dishonesty in all of the administrations involved. And you got to remember, I've served under 5 presidents. And so I've got to see one thing I know without a doubt is sadly every time a Democrat is, and that's the reason why in uniform, veterans or in uniform active duty personnel, only 15% vote Democrat. The rest of them align independent or libertarian, but they vote conservative. And the reason why is every time a Democrat is elected, they cut the defense budget by 30%. And they start reducing its forces, start reducing its benefits for the veteran populace. You know, my great-grandfather created the VA, York Mathis.
Okay.
And he was commissioned by President Hoover.
All right.
And so that's near and dear to me. But when you see things like that happen, you know what all it's going to do is turn into failure in the future. And so when Clinton cut down the budget by 30%, and he started downsizing military presence out in the sea when we have the largest, most powerful naval force. And we have USNS ships that supply, they're civilian ships that supply our fleet. And we had 15, and he knocked them down to 5. So that means we had to choose. Are we going to have 3 in the Pacific and 2 in the Atlantic, or vice versa? Well, what it also meant is all these ships had to go into ports a lot more consistently and regularly.
Okay.
And so what happened is the USS Cole pulled into port for its 3rd time that year and got attacked by Al-Qaeda.
That's fucked up.
And people don't realize that every time we lower our defense as a nation, shit like that happens.
Well, I mean, and there's a counter argument. Like, well, we do spend more money on defense than any other country in the world.
Yes.
And we spend even 5 times more than China does.
Yeah.
So the idea of reducing a defense budget is not necessarily bad. The problem is that these people don't know how to reduce the budget.
Yes, I agree.
Like with reducing policing, like we spend too much money on policing, but you can't reduce the budget by not hiring officers.
Yeah.
You can maybe reduce the budget by not subsidizing advanced assault weapons that you give to the cops. Yeah. Right, or something like that.
Do they need a military MRAP?
Yes. Or maybe like, you don't have to upgrade their car. You could maybe spend a few years between upgrading their vehicles.
Yeah.
I mean, you could maybe do that, right?
Yeah.
And reduce the budget and like, okay, that makes sense. But the way in which these people reduce the budget is it doesn't actually help improve healthcare. It doesn't improve education. It doesn't actually do anything to help working people. And all it does is put people in the military. It just puts your safety on the line.
Yeah.
And it's almost done on purpose because when your safety is on the line and the situation gets worse, all it does is continue to create another excuse for you to be in these places that you shouldn't even be anyway.
I agree.
Like that's how I feel about it. Did you see that CNN reporter?
Oh, that was right with the Taliban
they sound
behind.
really friendly, but they're
Yeah.
like
Death to America.
What do you think about that? Because I have an opinion on that.
there's going to be – so right now I think the Taliban has taken a page out of Hezbollah. They've learned that if they want a seat at the table to then carry out terrorist activities behind closed doors, act like a political structure. And the fact that we're even entertaining that is saddening. And then you look at Russia and China, who's already come out and said that they would do trade deals with Afghanistan still. You know?
It's horrifying. Like I don't see this happening under Trump. I mean, I know Trump did a lot of fucked up stuff, but I really don't see Donald Trump being okay with how we would leave this country, with how this would happen.
Well, everybody freaked out when he killed the Iranian military personnel.
Yeah,
but that guy
Baghdadi,
that guy was already on a hit list. He was already, I shouldn't say hit list. He was already on a target list. That guy's been on a target list since Obama.
Yeah, you got to kill that guy.
And that guy, I mean, they saw him out in the open. They're like, oh, let's take him off the board.
Yeah, and it's almost like a lot of these other leaders want to keep these guys alive because it justifies them staying there.
And Obama did the same thing with Osama bin Laden.
Well,
he took him off the board.
Yeah.
So the deal is I think if Trump was in office, without a doubt, a lot more people will be taken off the board. Right now we have Joe Biden, who doesn't seem to really know where he's at.
No, and then Kamala is honestly worse because she has more coherency to actually do all this horrible shit that people are afraid of.
What drug deal did she do? She was in even the top 10 candidates running for presidential office. What drug deal did she do?
What drug deal? What do you mean?
To make what arrangement did she do to become vice president?
Whose dick did she suck? Who knows what she did?
And so that, to me, I'm like, you could have picked that very smart Air Force veteran,
Gabbard?
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard, to be the vice president, because she called everybody out on their crap.
Yeah, but you know what though? Like the establishment hates her because she's not going to go along with any of that shit.
Exactly.
And so they don't want that.
She would serve the people.
She would serve the people. They don't want that. And it should be, based on how they treated Tulsi Gabbard, it should be so obvious that our establishment doesn't give a shit about you. So then when they're telling you, oh, get vaccinated, do this, wear a mask, I'm like, fuck, you don't care about me. If you cared about me, you would have been honest about how you promoted Tulsi Gabbard. You would have maybe talked about Jeffrey Epstein a little more than you did instead of using it as a blip in the radar. So, like, no, why should I listen to you guys? But, my take on the CNN lady is that she was just scared of getting killed, so she said that.
Yeah,
she just didn't want to get killed, so she's just saying that because she's like scared.
Well, I was telling people, because even right now they had another video of some local Afghan women holding up protest signs. If that's not orchestrated by Taliban to look like, oh look, we allow women to have free speech, which I completely
I feel like
think
that's orchestrated,
because they're great at PR. They're phenomenal at
well, so is Hamas. Like they will. Israel tells Hamas that they're gonna fire. They're gonna attack a building, and Hamas tells their women and children to stay in that building and makes them stay in the building so they can increase their casualties. Like, it's all theater.
And so the deal is I guarantee, sadly, the reality is those women. Because there's going to be some factions within the Taliban, without a doubt, because that's what it is. It's a faction. And they're going to be the extreme idealists of the just radical ways that they may not chop their heads off and kill them on a camera, but those women are probably in a ditch already.
The women that were
protesting, the 4 women.
Yeah, no one's going to know what happened to them.
Yeah, because right now they're going to do all their shady stuff behind closed doors, and in front of the camera, they're going to act like they're a political faction, that they're going to be like, we should be recognized on the global scale.
Yeah. How do you feel, last 2 things before we go, how do you feel about this fucking vaccine requirement? Because you're still in the military, right? You got soldiers who are rescuing refugees and putting their lives in the line in a war zone that are now not going to be allowed to serve and get dishonorably discharged and not be allowed to possibly own a gun or be looked at as domestic terrorists because they don't want to be a science experiment. Like, how are people okay with what this administration's doing?
Well, the commandant of the Marine Corps, he told the Secretary of Defense to go pound sand. And when I was in the Army just a few months ago, they didn't speak of any of it. It was all voluntarily. And now I'm in the Air Force. It's the same thing. But the deal is, if it comes down in order, man, there's so many loopholes. Jehovah's Witness I can be like, oh, I don't need to get that. People with certain skin disease, eczema, they don't get the polio shot. Certain things like that. There's always a way around.
But the fact that you're even doing that,
yes,
is
that
disgusting.
I can't just say no.
It's disgusting. It is just absolutely disgusting, especially when this guy's never served or done anything.
Yeah.
Past his life in Washington, he's been a career politician for 50 years, and this is what you're doing. Same what they're doing with the nurses, man. Nurses risked their lives during the pandemic, and now we have a staffing crisis because they fired them because they don't want to become experimented on.
I think all politicians, if you're going to make rulings over somebody else's in their job, you should have had worked in that job.
And they're not. No. My theory before we go, is that it's almost like they're bringing troops home so that they can wage war on Americans that are disagreeing with these narratives.
What we see in Australia, I truly believe that would not ever happen here in America. I know there's probably some Australians that would probably say the same thing about their own country, but there is far more people that from my cut of cloth that we call pipe hitters that would tell a whole bunch of people trying to come down with that order that's an unlawful order. It states right here in the UCMJ, and if you want me to fight me on it, we'll fight.
So you think enough commanders would just
not follow that unlawful order?
That's really comforting to hear.
Yeah.
Anyway, Austin, how do we get a hold of you?
Well, you can go to austintalley.com or austintalley.tx on Instagram or Austin Talley TX on Twitter.
Okay, what's the name of the bar you on real quick? We got to plug everything.
Whiskey Tango Foxtrot Ice House. I'm the operations director. It's the brainchild of the Spearley brothers, Karn and Shaban. Come on down for some live entertainment. It's pretty great. And you can go to WTFIcehouse.com or WTF Ice House on Instagram.
Hey, thank you so much. Austin Talley, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right. My bad.